It's like
No, it's
40
gonna
years
go way
ago.
back, probably.
40
Sean's on the right track.
Yeah. Like 40, 50 years ago.
1974 in the aftermath of Watergate.
Yeah. Oh, you just leave it there.
I know.
Just needed a lot of angry people.
We need another Saturday Night Massacre. All right, are we ready, Mike?
All ready?
Okay, so what I wanted to do was just kind of like a quick and dirty, basic intro to statistics as they're used in assessment. And what's driving this is that I've seen a couple of things in my time here. One is that we get all these great reports with tons of data, but I think we can sort of learn more about how do we hone down to the most pertinent data, and instead of trying to tackle everything, try to identify what those things are that are going to have the greatest impact on the whole, and narrow down our follow-up to some of these assessments so that the work is more manageable and that we're doing the work we know has the greatest impact. I've also seen a couple of assessments in my time here that aren't designed well. And so I just thought it would be a good opportunity to go over some very basic statistical stuff. I will tell you that I am not like a math person. My goal here is just to convey what some of these things mean when you see them on assessment results. It's not so that you can do things like go calculate your standard deviation or run your own p-score, things like that. That should all be done usually by a computer or by professionals. This is just so, what does it mean when I see these things on the assessment? And if any of you have any experience or would like to jump in or correct something I say, don't hesitate, please do it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of intro slide because I put a little comic, sorry, I love this. So the importance of a well-designed assessment, we're going to get lots of data, but we have to figure out how do we know which data is the most important, and how do we hone in to focus on those areas we want to improve on. I'll send this to you if anyone wants to read the Dobro comic later. I'll give you a few more seconds to finish it. Okay. So the first thing is a dependent variable. So a good assessment should have a dependent variable. The dependent variable is usually the last question. So an example I gave up here is overall, how satisfied are you with the food pantry? So it's kind of like the catch-all question, and again, it's the thing you're supposed to be measuring. So we do a lot of assessments here. We want to know how people feel about a food pantry or living on campus or the service they receive at the health center, etc. So you typically want to end on a question like this. One other brief survey design thing that is not anywhere in my slides, but I just thought about it because I said typically the last question is the dependent variable. One caveat to that is that most people who research surveys say that if you're going to collect demographic data, to make the demographic set the last part of the survey. So you basically go, the last meaty question would be overall, how is the service, followed by are you male, female, what class year are you, etc. Because a lot of people, when they start a survey, get turned off by being asked personal questions. But once they're kind of pot committed, they've gone through 15 questions, they're more likely to answer the demographics, and they're more likely to be honest when they answer them. Good question. So dependent variables is ultimately the thing you're studying. It could be, we do a lot of satisfaction, retention, graduation rates, etc. And then many of the questions are independent variables. So a well-designed survey is going to give you data as the relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variables. So if we're talking about how do you feel about, are you satisfied with the food pantry, a lot of the things we measure are things that cannot be directly measured. Like what exactly is satisfaction? And so satisfaction can be broken up into smaller things that are measurable, such as the intake process or the amount of time between doing the intake process and getting connected with services can be measured. The variety of food can be measured, that kind of thing. So what you're looking for in a survey in the end is how do the independent variables interact with the dependent variable? And that's going to give you some good indication about where you want to focus your follow-up efforts. So let's talk about that. So how you figure out the relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variables is through a regression analysis. Regression analysis are complex. I do not know how to perform one, but I do know that many of the surveys that that are pre-made, like the NESI or others, we can get a regression analysis done through the producer of the survey, and many of the surveys the institution puts out that are done through like IR would also, the folks in the various offices on campus that handle this would perform a regression analysis for you. And so, it's helpful because it gives you a place to start if you're looking to improve a program or process. So one of the interesting things that I found in my time of doing assessments is that the independent variable that has the greatest impact on the dependent variable is often not the thing that you're doing worst in relative to your survey results. So going back to the food pantry example, the area that's rated worst may be the intake process, let's say. So you might think, oh, well, I'll just improve that and then the score on the satisfaction will go up. That's not necessarily true, and in fact, the things that you're doing the best at are the things that most influence a person's, what they mark on that last question, what they're satisfied on. So a regression analysis is going to tell you that. So if you do a regression analysis on the food pantry survey, let's say, and let's say the intake process is the best rated, but the regression analysis also says this is the variable that is most influential on their ultimate satisfaction. What that would tell you is, if I want to solve other issues in the assessment, I should not divert resources from this piece because this piece most influences their overall thoughts about my program. Does that make sense? Similarly, you might get a lot of data like the NESI and you're like, where the heck do I start? A regression analysis would tell you this question over here, this is the order of questions that correlate to the satisfaction question. And you should focus on these areas first. And so you basically narrow it down from, some of these surveys have 20, 25, 40, 50 variables. You narrow it down from this huge number of independent variables to a much smaller, more manageable number that you can focus on that will, down the road, should increase satisfaction. Okay? Everyone following so far? Okay. So, the next thing is the p-value, also called the p-test. Not the kind of p-test you take when you've just been offered a job and you got to go do it, or you get taken down to the police station. That's a different p-test. So a p-value measures the likelihood that your survey results happen by chance. So you really want a well-designed survey that's going to elicit good answers for you. And if they're running a p-value or doing a p-test, they're simply doing an assessment as to the likelihood that these results happen by chance. So p-values are expressed by decimals, but I think it's way more helpful to convert it into a percentage. So a p-value might be expressed as 0.0254, but if you translate that into a percentage, it's 2.54%, which means that on this particular survey, there's a 2.54% chance that these results occurred entirely by chance. Generally you want your p-value to be less than 0.1 or less than 10%. Anything more than 10%, there's too high of a likelihood that those results occurred by chance. And any professional who's looking at the results of such an assessment would say, this isn't a valid, I can't take these answers to be, the gold standard. Any questions about p-tests? P-values? So next up is my favorite, which is standard deviation. I was telling Sean right before we started that statistics is the only math class I've ever gotten an A at, and this is probably the most complex math formula I ever at one point knew how to do. I couldn't do it now, but at one point many moons ago I could calculate a standard deviation. And I actually think once you've determined that you have a valid assessment, so your p-value is 0.1 or less, once you've determined, you've done a regression analysis to say, okay, what are the areas that I should focus on that are going to have the greatest impact on my overall satisfaction, retention, whatever it is you're studying. The next step would be to look at the standard deviation for the question. So if you imagine all of the individual responses to any assessment or survey question put out on a bell curve. The standard deviation essentially measures how far apart are all those individual answer points relative to the mean. So I find this useful because it gives you good data about if this is the thing I need to fix. Do I fix this with a broad sweeping change, or do I need to target the fixes towards usually it's a demographic, so towards a particular demographic. So an example, so a low standard deviation if the standard deviation is less than 1, that generally means that you can do a broad approach. So if we're looking at the food pantry and the intake process is the thing we want to improve, the standard deviation is less than 1, what that means is I can take a look at this entire process, I can change the entire process, and if I do a good job, it should increase the score on that particular independent variable. The standard deviation above 1 typically means that the answers are both spread apart and they're often clustered. And typically these clusters of responses in the bell curve will correlate with a demographic. So a good example would be a question on safety. If we were to do a question on safety on campus, the standard deviation would almost certainly be above 1. And any idea and there would probably be about 2 to 3 different cluster groups of responses. So any idea what those groups might convert to if we looked at the demographics of those groups? Who feels more safe, who feels less safe? Gender would be 1. So the men would almost certainly report feeling safer, and they would probably have there'd probably be a cluster of responses closer to the feeling safer side of the spectrum. Women would, on average, probably feel less safe, so they would have a cluster of responses closer to the less safe end of the spectrum. And people of color also probably feel less safe. So typically on questions like that, you would see a high standard deviation, and you would see the experience of groups based on their identity would probably be different. And so that would tell you, okay, I've got a safety thing I've got to deal with. It looks like the men are fine, but I need to make some kind of change that impacts the perception of women and or people of color. So then you know, okay, I've got to target my response to a particular demographic. So we might decide to do things like, well, we're not going to change the overall protocols, but what we are going to do is do more self-defense courses for women, or like those types of things that would make the environment, that may make the environment feel safer to that particular group. So it's all about the standard deviation, is it low and is it high, and then doing a little bit deeper of analysis to determine if the clusters of responses translate to demographics. And again, in student affairs, they typically do. Any questions about standard deviation? Okay. So here's some common mistakes that I've seen in surveys. So this is the interactive part. What's wrong with this question? How would you rate the degree to which service at the front desk is friendly and efficient? Why is that poorly worded? Yeah.
You're asking 2 different things.
Exactly. What are the 2 things?
Friendly and efficient.
Yep. So what if you have the friendliest people working the desk, but they're slow? So there's no way to answer that. Well, yeah, they're friendly, but they suck, right? So that should be 2 questions. How would you rate? Would you rate it to be friendly? Would you rate it to be efficient? Yeah.
Isn't it also the problem that you're telling the reader of the question that the front desk is friendly to rate their friendliness instead of rating their
Yes.
more of a generic question? It's like if you said, how bad is our service at the front desk? You're telling them that your service is bad and telling them how bad it is.
Yep.
You're giving them preconceived
Notion.
notion
Yeah.
of a positive or a negative attribute
Yep.
and how to rate it.
And that's actually very timely because that's our next question. So our organization was recently recognized for excellent communication with stakeholders. As a stakeholder, to what degree are you satisfied with our communication? Why is that a bad question, Chuck?
Because it's excellent.
Exactly. You've already said, hey, we've already been told we're excellent, so do you think we're excellent? Yeah. How about this one? Do you agree or disagree that the arts are not valued as a tool for community development? This is a little bit harder to pick out what's wrong.
Yeah. It's like a double negative.
It's a double negative, yeah. Yeah, so this question might be better worded is, on a scale from 1 to 7, to what degree do you feel arts are valued as community development? Good. All right, so that was quick and dirty. Do a couple quiz. So which of the questions below is most likely to be the dependent variable of a survey? A, how would you rate the floor programming your RA conducted this semester? B, how would you rate your RA's response to noise issues on your floor? C, overall, how satisfied are you with your RA? And D, how would you rate your RA's ability to resolve roommate conflicts? So which is most likely to be the dependent variable? A, B, C, or D? Who says A? Who says B? Who says C? Who says D? Okay, everyone says C. Good. You analyze the result of assessment and you see the p-value is 0.091. Based on this, should you consider the assessment results to be valid? Who says yes? Who says no? Why, Mike?
Nope, matter. Never
I
mind.
mean, it's not the best.
Correct.
Like, 9 is,
It's close to the line, yeah, but it doesn't go over. Depending on the type of assessment you do, there may be different standards as to the p-value. In general, in the type of assessments we do, a point 1 or less would be, or 0.01 or less. Now I'm doing the math. Right? Would be acceptable.
Is it 0.1 or 0.0?
0.01,
Oh.
because you do the 100.
Yeah.
because that's 1%, you said 10%.
Oh, 0.001. No, 0.1. What Chuck said, yeah. Sorry,
I'm the math major.
you want it to be 0.1 or less. There are some fields though, and particularly as you get into hard sciences, where they want to see it even lower.
5%.
Yeah. You perform a regression analysis, which indicates that a question on safety is where you should focus your efforts to improve overall satisfaction. The standard deviation on the safety question is 1.9. What might be your next step in responding to the results? So I kind of did this as an example when I went over this. You have a standard deviation of 1.9. What do you do next? You have this in front of you. Okay, I got my standard deviation. I know I have to do something about it. What's your next step?
You look at the demographics to see which population is.
Yeah. That's where I would start. Is I say, okay, show me, on a bell curve where these answers look, how these answers look, and then are there clusters, and do those clusters correspond to a demographic? So on things like, I think it's called Sky Factor now, they give you really good data on all this. Other assessments, you sometimes have to call and say, can you run a regression analysis on this, or can you give me more information, more basic information about the respondents? And they usually will. They're not going to tell you like, Nick Sweeten answered this way, but they'll say, yeah, like I actually sent one back once, and they sent me back the response bell curve, color-coded blue or pink, depending on, because I was looking at gender, so that I had a visual representation of where these demographic clusters might be on my bell curve.
Will Campus Labs do something like that for us?
I don't know if they'll do the visual representation like that, but once we have the demographic file in there, we will be able to tease out the data by any demographic variable that we have access to.
Yeah, sometimes they won't.
do standard deviation.
They must. It's pretty basic.
Yeah, I'd have to look.
You can also, there are some computer programs that you can get to run standard deviation.
But then they have to learn how to use those.
No, it asks you like dumbing down questions, like how many people were a part of your survey, 260, 260. What's your average of all your answers?
Excel will do it too,
Yeah.
on a flat file. It's pretty easy.
That's next.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of assessments here that had no dependent variable. So it's like, okay, good information, but what are we measuring? Has anyone else seen any issues with, I think we're getting a lot better at this than we were at least when I started. But has anyone else seen any issues they can cite as examples for assessments or surveys that maybe were worded in a way that maybe was inaccurate, or where we got answers but no real direction about what to do with all the data? I kind of feel that way about Messi. I think Nessie gives us a lot of good data, but I don't know like where or how we've chosen what to start with first, if we're going to attend something. Do you know, Mike?
With the Nessie data?
Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes our approach with Nessie has been to see what potential trends are coming out of that
Mhm.
data set, and so it's very responsive. We didn't go into it with an active question, which I think for me is one of the things that we've missed sometimes in our assessment strategy, is not starting with the question and saying, oh, great, we have this data set, let's look at it, let's explore it. So I think that would be a helpful step, is to go into it with, okay, this is my exact question that I need to get the answer to.
Yeah.
And then that would help with your point to the dependent variable, which is oftentimes missing.
Yeah.
Would you say that there was a pointed dependent variable in the Hope Lab study that was done with us last year?
So I don't remember the instrument, but I think you could make an argument that the level of hunger / homelessness could be a meta-dependent variable. Yeah.
Seems a little abstract, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's in there, it's just not, you can't get a value on it based on the way the instrument was constructed.
Yeah, I mean, when we do those third-party assessments, there's nothing on the assessment itself that says this is the dependent variable, typically. And like I said, usually it's the last question or the last question before demographics, the overall. Cool. Well, quick, simple, and dirty. So I feel like over time, like we can come back and do like iteration 2 of this, like as we keep going and our practice increases in sophistication, we can go back to and do more sessions like this as we get more sophisticated, so that once we master like this stuff, maybe we can start to look at things like t-tests or things like that, so that we understand what those concepts mean. Cool.
So, I have a question.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of, like, end of semester, end of year program evaluation, satisfaction, whatever. And there are a lot of things that I want to know about a program. So can you survey with multiple dependent variables? Or like, do you know what I mean?
Yes. So if you want to measure satisfaction and
Effectiveness?
yeah, effectiveness, that's a good one. You can have 2. So like your last 2 questions would be overall, how effective was our programming series? And then the next one could be overall, how would you rate it or something like that. And then you could look at each of the preceding questions and how they influence each dependent variable separately.
I'm thinking we would be measuring, we would want to talk about like, Athleta is ending tomorrow, so I'm thinking about our survey and maybe I'm going to go rewrite it. Like, we want to know how your mentor was, but the overall program, like what you learned, and there's multiple different pieces to try to, so.
We are still asking about to me, it sounds like you're trying to find out the value or something of the program, and all of those pieces, the mentor, and all those pieces flow into one question about the value or the experience or the.
I mean, I guess it's, yeah, you could look at it as, I mean, in general, I want to know overall, are you satisfied with this experience? Is that the way you look at it?
That's the way I look at it, yeah. So if you're looking at
Did your mentor influence this experience? And like how?
so some assessments are just simple yes no's, right? Like I just need to know, did each mentor do this? Then you don't necessarily need a dependent. I mean, that would be a different type of information gathering. But if you're looking to measure a concept that can't be directly measured, like satisfaction or efficiencies, then yeah, you would want a survey that has that's designed with a dependent variable or multiple dependent variables.
Which campus labs could be really cool to experiment with, because you can cross-tab analysis of multiple dependent and independent variables, and so you can chart them out on multiple axes and see if there's any patterns to the way that data plots, and it's all visual. So we can,
And that would be a regression analysis.
Did you get a 3D map?
Well, it's flat. That's why.
Oh, it's only on 2 axes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's you.
I was going, whoa, okay.
Campus Labs comes with 3D glasses.
Yeah,
Any other questions, trivia questions?
So, I have a proposal. We'll be launching the staff assessment competency survey probably in the next couple days, which you've looked at a couple weeks ago, if not a month or two ago. When that data set comes back in a week or two, do you want to bring it back here and workshop some of that and start to ask some questions of it?
we decided if it was a good survey or not.
Yeah, we can decide if it was a good survey or not. So Campus Labs, as part of the implementation process, has a baseline competency survey to see how staff users, their level of competency in assessment techniques and practices, what that is. And so we basically copy it over from them, administer it, and then we have a sense of where folks are, and we can calibrate our training accordingly. So we have a sample data set. We can learn some of these techniques to do that. Cool. Actually, do you want to talk a little bit about, you launched a project. I'm just curious where you all are with that.
I mean, it's still non-existent, but the idea behind it is that we started like a case managing process through Zone with UAccess. So every time a student comes in, we would prefer them to also go through the screening process where we look at them as a holistic person rather than like, okay, you need to go to the food pantry, get food, come back next week. So we screen them for things like legal services. We have a nonprofit legal service, I guess, coming in, studying tomorrow, so all these different things. So with the case managing process, we sort of want to evaluate how this first semester of piloting has gone regarding scheduling, which was a little shaky in the beginning, it's a little bit better now, what the process is like in the meeting, and then whether they're benefiting from the services that they've been provided with through their case manager. So that's sort of like the overall overarching goal of what that assessment is supposed to be. And then hopefully during Jan term, we can take that data if we collect it in time. I know there's like no weeks left before Christmas, but if we get all that information in time, we hope to use the Jan term to sort of implement changes and continue doing it just better next semester. So that's the first evaluation we have planned, and then the second one is the overall satisfaction of UAccess, which the food pantry example would be super relevant and fun, so I enjoyed that. But I'm using the case managing evaluation sort of as like a pilot in my experience in playing with Campus Labs, and then doing the big overall overarching one later next semester, or earlier next semester. So that's what's going on.
And you actually requested a Scratch build, so I'm curious how that's been. You sent them kind of rough parameters, and now are they working with you, talking
I
to you?
haven't heard anything. So they said it would take 7 business days to get back to me, and it just hasn't been that long yet. So I'm waiting to see what that'll look like. I did go through the surveys that they had already, like the ones that are, you know, shining stars or whatever, but I just don't think there's anything that's along the lines of what we're doing and asking the same questions that we're asking that I could have pulled from. Because I do have like survey experience and stuff like that, but just I thought it would be easier to start from scratch and then go from there. And plus that'll be easier for me starting from scratch and then building the one for next semester as well. So that's where I'm at.
Any other experiments that people are doing? Any other thoughts about things you want to do?
I've just been doing some deep diving into what they are offering for assessments. So I've been looking at other institutions, their surveys, and seeing what we can use for orientation for this upcoming semester.
Do you plan to move your end of program survey into Campus Labs?
Yes, because they are a little aggressive in the completion of the survey.
You can be very aggressive with it. So if you upload the emails for the respondents, you can program the system to remind people as many times as you want. Be careful with 10 reminders, but 2-3 reminders until they respond or until you give up. And they'll just keep sending the link.
I've gotten an email twice a day from the same person conducting a survey from University of South Carolina for the last 7 days, even on weekends.
Oh my God. That would make me, yeah, immediately to trash and I'm not doing your survey.
No, I understood the first, like, the
Yeah.
first two, I got it one morning, it's about the media on campus. And then I got it the next morning. And I was just like, yeah, I got it, I'm gonna get to you, don't worry. It says it takes 45 minutes to do online, so I'm like,
Yeah.
But then it was just like, boom, then I started twice a day. And now I'm like, I just see the email and swipe. And I don't,
Is it the same messaging too, or is it?
just to remind you is now what it says. It says, the first few are, I hope you read my email, and then this one is just to remind you, you have yet to complete the survey. And I literally, I wish I could hit reply and be like, I never said I would complete the survey. So I would watch out like my team for that.
Yeah.
Can you give it a time frame too?
I know you can limit the number of times it'll go out, the reminder. I don't know if it's,
You know what I mean, like twice a week for 2 weeks, and then
Yeah.
you're giving up.
yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Please don't turn it.
Yeah.
But it's once an hour, yeah. Once every 10 minutes.
Just, we saw that?
You said there, Bob?
Well, thank you, Nick, for doing that. I think it was really helpful.
Thanks, Mike.
We have that recorded, so we'll add that to our YouTube channel, and if there are other topics, it sounds like you have a follow-on to this, so maybe we'll play around with the data a little bit in this group for our last meeting of the semester in 2 weeks, and then we'll talk about agenda items for spring. So if you come next time with some thoughts for spring, that would be really helpful. And last but not least, I'll put out a request, if there is a data set you would like to load into Campus Labs so that you are able to do longitudinal data comparison, now is the time to request that at Campus Labs. So they do it twice a year. They do it in January and then they do it in June. It's a fairly labor-intensive process for them, so that's why they limit it to the off semesters. So if there is a data set, and Heather, you had talked about at one point looking at some FLI data, BBS, sorry, I'm making things up now. And I
You would
think,
think that we would have more on FLI.
so BBS would be great. If there are other data sets that you all have access to that you would like to compare what you're doing now to the historic stuff, let's load it up into Campus Labs. And there's some pretty good visualizers in there and some statistical analysis. To your point, I would assume standard deviation is in there. My computer has died, so I can't actually look that up. So I'm just going to assume it's there.
Question.
Yes.
What are some examples of what should be going in there for longitudinal data? Like I'm thinking for us, like is there anything I should consider?
For you all, I think it's tough because your data collection has been uneven over the past couple of years, and so your metrics have changed, and I'm not sure if you've done a systematic survey. There was the 2012 effort done by the sociology students, a group of students.
Wasn't it the college management?
That was like,
Psych,
Was that
psych,
Okay.
yeah, psych students. So there was that survey that was done. That might be a data set, but I don't think we actually have the flat data for that. We only have the end data. But, you know, if you want to look at users over the years, I'm not sure how much value you're going to get out of that, though. Yeah.
Good to know.
So I think going forward for you all, that will be probably a far more useful way to approach it.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Anything else for good of the order? All right. That's it then. See you all in 2 weeks. I'll send you invites again.
But does it wait next week?
It should end in 2 weeks. Should work for 2 weeks.
That's what I mean, so.
Yeah.
I just put it on my phone.
Oh,
Did you send the first request already?
yeah, he declined them all apparently.
How did I do, that's what I'm trying to figure out, how I did that.
I don't know, I thought it was me.
yeah, you would think it would stay open.
Then can you actually send me one for the spring? Because I have no idea where they're on my calendar. I wonder if I declined one because I wasn't going to be there. Is that what you said? Or is that what you saw?
Yeah.
Oh. 'Cause I-
I'll have to look at it.
Survey, correct?
It should be right, easy to add you.